Zoom. Oh, great, cool. You're telling me we're recording, good.
Yeah, I just started because you're about to say something wonderful. So rather than
Thanks.
wait, I thought it would be a good time to begin the recording.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I like about Zoom, and there's not a lot of things that I like about it, to be honest, but the thing that's cool is to see friends that are not local, see friends that I haven't seen in a while. I named a few there, and I mean, that's really, that's a nice thing. So I appreciate everybody being here, and some of my colleagues from the William Davidson Foundation are here. I see Cindy and Darren, and I think I saw Richard somewhere who I haven't had the pleasure of seeing in a little while, since we've all been working from home at the William Davidson Foundation. But we're still doing great work, and the team members that you and I hope I haven't missed any of my WDF colleagues, but
Manny's also on the line, Ethan.
oh, Manny's there. Oh, I do see Manny.
Yep.
They do great work, and the kind of change that they're making, not just in the Jewish world, but also in the not necessarily Jewish world of Detroit. I'm lucky to have, these caliber of professionals really managing my father's legacy and running the affairs of the William Davidson office, even from home.
Wow, that's great. Okay, so I'm going to take a couple of minutes to do introductions, and then we'll jump in. Is that okay, Ethan?
Great.
Okay, super. First of all, my name is David Kramer. I am the director of the library at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and it is our privilege and pleasure to be able to present book talks and other programming over the course of the year. The move to Zoom has actually been quite wonderful for us because it means, as you just said, we've been able to reach people literally from around the country and around the world. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for us. This is the last of our book talks for this academic year, and it's really a special occasion. I didn't know, actually, before, when we agreed to do this, I didn't know what a pleasure it would be to read this book and a privilege to sponsor this book talk. So I have to say that up front. A couple of words on the technicalities before we jump into the substance. Over the course of the presentation, I am going to spotlight Ethan and myself. I might unspotlight myself from time to time, but we're going to be mostly in conversation, but we're also going to leave time at the end for for questions and some conversation. Given the friendliness of the crowd, I'm actually going to go against our normal rules. Ordinarily, what we do is ask people to put questions into chat, and I will pick them up and address them to the speaker. But given the friendliness that I just detected here, I think it might be a good idea just to let people raise their hands and let them speak up. And if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, I'll tell everyone to shut up, I'll mute them, and we'll go back to the old put it in the chat routine. But we'll try it the other way because it's less formal. How about that? Is that okay, Ethan?
Sounds great. And I mean, I don't know exactly how Zoom Beit Midrash might work, but so if like standing up and yelling some kind of disagreement or yelling some kind of question is what suits you, then I absolutely encourage that.
That would be great. That would be great. Okay, so let me say a word about the book. I don't know how many have had an opportunity to dive into this yet. I encourage it very deeply. It's interesting. As I said, I didn't know what to expect here. And when we had our initial conversation, Ethan, you emphasized how personal and idiosyncratic this volume would be. I think you were kind of setting me up, to say, don't expect anything. You didn't know how I would react. And of course, I didn't know how I would react either. And I have to say, I am just blown away by this. I hope I can use that kind of language. It is deep and erudite. It's filled with references both to Jewish tradition at all of its many levels, as well as to other traditions. It shows very sophisticated appreciation of the way language works and wordplay, and the poetry that you write is filled with absolutely wonderful wordplay, really remarkable. And, you know, I was trying to think of what an analogy would be. Some of you will appreciate this. There's a volume that was published years ago called Sefer HaAgadah by the great national poet of the new, you know, emerging nation of Israel in the 20th century, Bialik. And he said he wanted to recreate a national literature based upon inherited traditional literature. And so it's offered for a modern audience a very, very rich range of traditional sources. This is a kind of Sefer Haggadah in poetry.
Wow.
But you need the notations in order to make full sense of it. And it is very well annotated. I must say that was a very important part of the book, and I expressed my gratefulness in that regard. The only other thing I'll say is I was thinking about this. This is a self-published book, right? And there's both a little bit of sadness that I, you know, bring to that recognition, as well as some joy. The sadness is that we live in an age where it's very, very hard to find a publisher for poetry in general, and certainly for, you know, this very special kind of poetry. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, we're fortunate to live in an age where we've got the technologies that make it possible to publish a book like this in a really beautiful form, even without an official publisher, which means that you can have as many readers as there are copies of the volume, and we're privileged that that is the case. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spotlight both of us, and I'm going to begin with my first question, which is to ask you to comment on why you wrote this book, and then I will, you know, we'll begin a conversation. How about that?
Sounds great.
Okay, go right ahead.
Yeah, well, you know, the answer, you know, to that question, why I wrote this book, there's a couple parts to it. I'll try to make it not too long and somewhat cogent. You know, it's I think I have to go back to, first of all, coming back to Detroit. You know, leaving a life as a touring musician, coming back to Detroit maybe 15 years ago, because my father wanted to set up you know, a philanthropy. He wanted to set up a family foundation. And, you know, unfortunately, he passed away, you know, just a few years after I came back. The foundation became, you know, like a real going concern. And I think that, you know, part of it, I sort of determined early on, or I think maybe some friends had encouraged me that, you know, in order to be as effective a Jewish philanthropist as I could be, or really, you know, effective custodian of someone else's Jewish philanthropy as I could be, that I really needed to, you know, to begin to study more deeply. I'd always kind of been interested in philosophy, and I'd always kind of been interested in religion. And I was a day school kid, and I was very briefly a JTS student. But, you know, friends encouraged me to really dive a little, you know, more deeply in. And of course, you know, there's some friends I study with online that I should acknowledge: Rabbi Asher Lopatin, Rabbi Shimshi Jonas, and Rabbi Mendel Stein. And I hope I didn't miss anybody else, but those were the three that I just saw a moment ago. And I study with many others, and I study really with, and Chazan Propus, I should say, as well. People that are really run the gamut of Jewish observance and Jewish identity. I don't really distinguish between, you know, ultra Orthodox or secular or whatever. If they're knowledgeable, and if I have something to learn from them, and I have something to learn from everybody, I try to engage with as many as I can and to study with them, and hope that it makes me a more effective custodian of this philanthropy. So that's sort of one piece. I've been working on this other book for a couple of years, which is really a much more academic piece. We don't have to go into it right now, but it's about what Jewish tradition has to say about human creative potential, the way that we impact the world, right? And again, Asher Patton has read pieces of this. I know Shimshi has read pieces of this. Arnie Eisen has been good enough to counsel me on this, as well as a colleague at Bar Ilan University. And so I've been working on that academic piece for a couple of years. But in the meantime, all these other things that I study in Chavrusa come up that don't really fit into that academic piece. And it'd been on my mind for a while to organize all my notes over a decade of Chavrusa into something, right? Maybe just to organize them for myself. And I thought early on, I don't want to write a big academic piece on all this. I just want to write what comes out of my head. In the notes, I'll write more academically, which is what I did. And as I went through, I started to think maybe this could, be interesting to other people, and I should put it in a book. And when COVID hit, I was stuck in my house, nowhere to go, like the rest of us. And so, I made this book, and that's sort of the why in a nutshell. The one last piece, I guess I should say, is I wanted really, for my children to, and for their, children, God willing, to know something about, my Jewish journey, at least where I am, at this moment. I mean, the journey will, God willing, continue, and I'll continue to evolve. But I wanted them to have some kind of document of, where I've been and the kind of things that I'm struggling with, let's say. And that goes into, which we can talk a little bit more later on about stylistically. That's part of the reason behind leaving more blank space on the page than writing, because that's the pieces for them to fill in later on, or the pieces for you to fill in later on. I mean, I'm a person that writes all over, the margins of my books. I find that very useful. And, maybe you'll get this and you say, gosh, there's so much blank space on every page. It's a good place for me to write my own book alongside this book. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the way I feel about it.
No, that's great. Yeah, there's room for other books on the sides of what you've done. It also struck me as I looked at the visual of the typography was very reminiscent of what traditional Jewish scribes would do in order to beautify the pages that they were writing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I played with fonts. I played with putting words in sort of non-traditional, non-obvious parts of the page. I messed the margins all up. I mean, part of that is, I came out of as an undergraduate student at Michigan and at Harvard, I was a literature major. And I was really, particularly interested in 20th century American literature, the beats, but also, before the beats, and then later on the Black Mountain poets and that sort of thing. And somebody says, can you show a page? I'll show you maybe one of the most extreme pages. I wanted to towards the end of the book, I'm writing about, I'll just set this up and then I'll go back to stylistically what I was trying to do. I was on page 389. Yeah, exactly. You read my mind. I wanted to show like how in the 10th chapter of Genesis, right before the Tower of Babel, the people are already spreading out, right? And so I wanted to so that's maybe the most extreme example of this. You can see where I put they've divided, but I've scattered the letters all over the page, right? And then a few pages later, as we're talking about, who were these Babel people? They didn't have identities. They didn't have their own names. One interpretation that comes down from the rabbis is that, they wanted everybody basically to be the same. So I wrote as part of this, keeping, with that view, what might be a constitution or a preamble of a constitution for these Babel people. And then I had them all sign their names. And you can see it's just a page of bricklayer, 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 you know, and so I think it really is a way to express the oppressiveness of that kind of society, you know, to express the oppressiveness of that on the page, right? If you had to live in a place where you had to be just like everybody else, you know, how would you represent that on a page? And so that's kind of some of the stuff that I played with in terms of the style. And it all, you know, a lot of it comes from, again, I think, you know, beat poetry, you know, Black Mountain poets, but also I think, you know, parts of it is really, it blends into jazz and that, you know, I was never a jazz musician, but I'm a jazz fan. And, you know, again, I you know, mentioned my friend Vincent on the line here, who we played with, who he and his wife are, you know, really accomplished musicians, a trombonist and an opera singer. So, you know, I don't know if they will, you know, look at it and say, yeah, it feels like jazz.
It looks like jazz. That's for sure. That's for sure. You said that you would take an opportunity to read a couple of pieces.
Yeah.
I think that for people who haven't had an opportunity, and even for those who have, to hear it in your voice, could you share that with us now?
Yeah, I'd love to, actually. You know, one of them that it's not too long towards the beginning, that a little bit, you know, there's a lot of different pieces I think that kind of maybe frame up this whole work. And one of them I wrote after studying this letter that Franz Rosenzweig had written to Martin Buber. And I studied this letter actually at the office of the William Davidson Foundation with Chancellor Arnie Eisen of JTS. And I was inspired to write this piece, which kind of put me in dialogue with Rosenzweig and Soloveitchik and Halachic Man. I imagine that we were all on a camping trip somewhere. So it's a little piece called Rosenzweig, Buber, Soloveitchik, and the Road. So, the Jewishness of every individual has squirmed on the needlepoint of a Y. Franz Rosenzweig. On postcards in the trenches of World War I, Franz Rosenzweig writes The Star of Redemption. So it seems to me, when he speaks of paths and pathlessness, he must be speaking from experience, i.e., he knows what he's talking about. I never understood what Rosenzweig was talking about. I didn't understand Star of Redemption when I read it at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and I haven't cracked it since. But I recently read his letter to Martin Buber on teaching and law. There's no need now to recount this dispute for the sake of heaven between Rosenzweig and Buber. What interests me is how I read Rosenzweig's letter. Rosenzweig tells us of paths and pathlessness, and the goal always lying a step beyond in pathlessness. Does a path lead, asks Rosenzweig, to pathlessness? Rosenzweig speaks of that which we know and calls it a laborious and aimless detour through knowable Judaism. This laborious and aimless path, it seems to me, is the sum of whatever Jewish knowledge we have received up to now. And it gives us the confidence to venture into pathlessness, the pathlessness of the as yet undiscovered country of the Torah, which we will bring. So I picture myself backpacking across the mountains, maybe back to my Alaska days, maybe back to my Isle Royale days. I know how to read a map. I know how to use a compass. I can identify landmarks. I can make a fire. I know how to stay dry. Rosenzweig turns, shifting under the weight of his own pack, his boots caked in mud, and says to me, these wilderness skills have been cultivated along that laborious and aimless path which has brought us thus far. At this point, I identify our other fellow traveler, Halachic Man. Halachic Man knows how to read a map. knows how to use a compass, and can identify landmarks. He can certainly pitch a tent. Indeed, he can make a tent out of dolphin skin. Halachic man has spotted a bubbling spring just a little further down along the path we have yet to tread. He already possesses a fixed a priori relationship with this real phenomenon, Rav Soloveitchik whispers, as he stops to measure a fruit, to determine whether it is at least 1/3 of the way to complete ripeness. By that, do you mean, I ask Rav Soloveitchik, that he understands the complex of laws regarding the halachic construct of a spring, and that we, who are yet so rugged and so worn from our wanderings, might use yonder spring as a mikvah? Precisely so, responds the Rav. So this mikvah must be our goal, I exclaim. Not at all, says Rosenzweig. Our immersion lies just a step beyond, in pathlessness. We can reach both the teachings and the law only by realizing that we are still on the first step of the way, and by taking every step upon it ourselves. Franz Rosenzweig. So that's a little funny one, and I have a little. I mean, it's a serious one, of course, but it's a little funny. I have a little, laugh at halachic man's expense building a tent out of tachash skin, But I mean, it's a real talent if you have that talent.
Yeah. And I mean, as I said in my introduction, I mean, this is deeply grounded for anyone who has studied that, and that will include some who are here. And it's a very wonderful reflection on the consequences of the approach that Soloveitchik suggests. When we spoke earlier today, I warned you that I was going to ask you to reflect on some of the personal
Sure.
here.
Sure.
So is it okay if I do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I want to, at the very beginning, you lay a foundation for this book, beginning with your father's death.
Yeah.
And with a pan to his life.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, it's I never know what to say really, there. I mean, it's, I think a lot about him, all the time, really. And, I think about his father, unfortunately, and some people know this story, his father and his uncle were killed a week before Rosh Hashanah when my father was 19 years old. So he never, got to, have the time with his father that I had with mine. I had my father twice as long, effectively. And his death was somewhat unexpected, I guess. I mean, he had some health issues, on and off, and he was young for his family, young to die. He was 86. In his family, that's young, but I remember, he didn't tell me much. He was a man of very few words. He was a very quiet, and a very, not a self-promoting kind of a guy, and not a guy that needed to express a lot, but he was a very, very good father. And so the things that he said, the few things that he said, were always really important, because he just didn't waste a lot of time on words. I have the opposite problem. But he told me that he told me once he was a kid, and he wasn't so serious. He liked to send him to a Jewish school, and he used to escape from the school at the first chance that he could get every day. And he had some friends in the alley, and they'd shoot dice, and they'd gamble in the alley and all this stuff. And he wasn't really that serious. And then his father and his uncle were killed, and he was the oldest, out of really 6, kids that were really cousins, but they were more like siblings. They all lived in the same house. And he was the oldest one. and so it was, he was the one to make sure that everybody got to shul, to say Kaddish, and they did that for 11 years. And so he went, um, in the course of a day, really, from being a kid that was gambling in the alleys to a kid that was getting everybody to shul to say Kaddish, a couple times a day.
Mm.
And he told me that story, and believe me, I've told you that story just now in more words than he used, right? So, and then I remember, being a teenager myself. I was 16 or something when his mother died, and here, he was, building businesses all over the world, owning all these sports teams. He had responsibilities literally all over the world. And his mother passed away. And here he was, he could find any excuse to, I have to run an empire. I don't have time to go and say Kaddish for my mother, but I saw him going 3 times a day to shul to say Kaddish for his mother for 11 months. His mother was a very strong, like really a giant and a businesswoman, and she was right there with Henry Dezolt, funding Hadassah and all that. She was a very big force in his life, and he was a lot like his mother in that way. But he always knew the right thing to do, and he was going to say Kaddish for her. So, when I was confronted with that, I think when he died, I was going, I'm not saying this by way of bragging. It's just a way of trying to say, how this whole thing developed and how we're here now, or at least how I'm here now. I was going, I found myself automatically going and doing this and saying Kaddish every day, and I've been living with him ever since. It's one of those things where, it seems like he died a million years ago, and it seems like he died yesterday. And I still, I still work for him, of course, even though it's been 12 years since he passed away. And I tell my colleagues at the Davidson Foundation this, we talk about it, and I say, I think the thing from my standpoint, the thing that would make me happy was if he would come into the office one day, by chance, to see what we've been up to all this time. And he would say, what is it that you've been doing? And we would tell him about the philanthropic investments we've made. And he would agree with some of them, and he would disagree with others. But if we could honestly tell him, okay, well, the ones that you disagree with, here's our process, here's why we did it this way, and that we could be honest with him about that, about our process, and really explain it and show how we arrived at the conclusion that we arrived at, even if he continues to disagree. If it was an honest process, he would be happy, I think. And so as long as we continue to do that, and I believe we do, that makes me happy. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I think a lot about my father, and I'm with him every day, and I continue to learn from him, really.
Well, it certainly, you've expressed his inspiration and his model for you and for what you do. It reminds me of one of the pieces that you wrote here, which actually caught my attention in a very particular way. The piece called Simpson Leadership and My Father.
Yeah.
Right? Wonderful piece. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read a little bit of it.
Yeah, go ahead.
And just ask you to respond.
Sure.
You begin with education. Kabbalah tells us that God, in order to create a space in which the world could exist, first contracted God's self, which is to say that God created some space in which God was not, so that we could exist. Mm-hmm. This contraction of God is known as Tzimtzum. Had God not done Tzimtzum, the world as we know it could not exist, since, in a certain sense, God would totally overwhelm it. These Kabbalistic concepts are rather difficult, highly esoteric, and easily misinterpreted. They could be soberly and seriously handled. In any event, I do not intend to dive in too deeply. For our purposes, I could briefly sketch what Rav Isaac Luria says about Tzimtzum, and now you go on and you provide more detail, but where all of this leads is to the essential quality of leadership,
Right.
which in Luria's reading God shows, and which in your reading your father also showed.
Absolutely.
The capacity to withdraw and give space to others in order that they too might create.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, people would often ask him the secret to his success. And his response always like, well, when I was a little kid, people basically left me alone. That was his, which means, and if you, that's all he would say. And if you heard that, it wouldn't make much sense to you. But, knowing him a little more deeply, as I was fortunate to do, I know that what he meant was, his parents were very good parents. And they, and the home was a very caring home and a very Jewish home, but they basically didn't overprescribe, things for him to do, or they let him, his mother, I think, is, as powerful as she was, she must have done some kind of tzimtzum as a mother for him and allowed him the space. And his father was basically a pretty quiet guy, and of course, as I said, passed away quite early. But I think he never probably would have used that word tzimtzum, but I think it must be what he experienced, from his parents.
It's a wonderful term, and one that we should all bear somewhere in our hearts. Remember that it's an important quality. There's another personal piece that actually is not about your father. It's about something else personal that drew my attention because of the typography. So since you mentioned it before, so I was leafing through, having read certain parts and not other parts, and then seeing what did I want to read next.
Yeah.
And I came to pages that looked like this.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it said, and it flows through Israel, and it flows through Judah, and it flows through Al-Andalus, and it flows through Toledo. And I said, what is the flowing? So I went back to the beginning of that sequence. This is a poem that I read backwards.
Yeah.
Right. And so this section begins by saying, a river issues forth from Eden. A river issues forth and becomes divided, and it flows out of Eden, and it flows through the wilderness, and it flows through Ur, and it flows through Haran, and it flows through Egypt. And then I go below, right? I read about Spain, and it flows through Eastern Siberia, and it flows through the Bering Land Bridge, and it flows through an ice-free corridor, and it flows through the Plateau of Mexico, right? And on and on and on it goes. And I said, what is this flowing about?
Right.
Yeah. So I went backwards, and this was actually a longer piece than I expected. And lo and behold, this begins with the title, How I Met Your Mother.
Right.
How I Met Your Mother. And all I'll say is it's just so wonderful, because this flowing from one space to the other, and of course the flowing is all about connection. And it reminded me of a rare book we've got in our collection at the Library of JTS, which was printed by the Sephardic community living in Amsterdam in the latter part of the 1600s. And it gives a history up to their day of the Jews. And it starts with creation. It goes to Abraham and Moses and everything. And then it goes to their own experience.
Right.
It's all connected. And when I read this, the flowing and the connection, I was reminded, your claim is that it's all connected. Have I read it at least partially correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's, look, I guess, one thing I'll say, before all of that is, I was always troubled, and I write about it in different parts of this book. I'm always troubled by the verse that's in the second chapter of Genesis. We're hearing about, the creation of the Adam, the planting of the garden, and then all of a sudden there's this business about these rivers that break, and the guys on the phone that I study with regularly know that I'm obsessed with these rivers, and that's one of the things that I always really focus on and try to understand what are these rivers doing here. And the Zohar briefly, tells us, well, the river of Eden is the, means by which souls incarnate into this plane of existence. We're all coming down this river and coming into this, embodied existence, so to speak, right? So, so anyway, how do I, tell this story personally? And I thought, well, I can talk about how, I first met your mother, meaning, the mother of my kids, right? I'm writing to my kids here. And I told, briefly like how we met and, started to get to know each other and these crazy business about sailing around the world on cargo ships and all this kind of stuff. And then I want to connect where we are today all the way back to that river in Eden. So that's why that passage at the end of this whole thing starts with a river from Eden. And then it, you go through like, Haran, which is a place that my wife and I actually traveled before we had kids. We were in Haran, Turkey, which is, right on the border of Syria, right off of the Euphrates River, Pirat. And anyway, there's more to say about Haran, but and then I talk about her family, which left Toledo, Spain 500 years ago and came to Mexico, and they, at some point intermarried in with the native Mexican population. That's why there's, the plateau of Mexico and Tenochtitlan, which is the old, Aztec name for what's now Mexico City, right? And then I have the Pale of Settlement and Volhynia and Krasilov and Berdichev, which is where, part of my father's family came from, and cities in Iowa, which is where they landed when they came here. And then I have, these places from my biological mother's family, that are associated with British India, which is where they were living a century ago. So that's why you have, Rangoon and Moulmein and Taungji. Those are places that are now in Burma, the country we call Burma. And it brings us all the way up to to Detroit and of course Wiseman, Alaska, where I lived, and in Istanbul, which is where I first lived with my wife, and then back to Haran, which is one of the places we went to on our honeymoons. And now our children are here, and where were there, where is your river going to take you, right? Where are they going to go? So I don't know if any of that makes any sense, but it makes sense to me.
It definitely makes sense. Makes great sense. There's another piece that I want to ask you about and actually bring focus to, because I felt it both prophetic in the best sense and challenging. And what made it prophetic was the way it was challenging. The piece is called "The World is on Fire."
Yeah.
And it begins by referencing the call to Abraham at the beginning of Genesis chapter 12, Lech Lecha, right, go. Abraham's got a mission. But then it goes to an earlier address of God to the humans, which is, where are you, right? The garden, right? Ayeka, where are you? As you emphasize it. And then you create this wonderful series of dichotomous exchanges, dialogues maybe is a better way to say it, where there are biblical references to oppression, right? So I have indeed seen the affliction of my people, Exodus 3:7. And the response to that is, where are you?
Yeah.
God has heeded the cry of the youth in his present state. Where are you? The earth is filled with robbery. Where are you? How dare you crush my people and grind the faces of the poor, Isaiah? Where are you? All of this is a call, and it goes on, right? A call that we've got to respond. And as you then go on, only some respond by standing up and saying, Hineni. Right? Here I am. And I mean, first of all, this is a beautiful way of expressing protest and expressing the call. But I also earlier asked you, as I read this, I was reminded of Leonard Cohen, um, and particularly of his song "You Want It Darker," which is very, very haunting. And for those who know it, expresses Hineni, right? Here I am, and actually ends with an audio quotation. I don't know who the chazan is, but you can hear.
Good friend of he's a good friend of mine and David Propus's. He's getting Chazan Gideon Zettelmeyer up in Montreal.
Oh, well, there you go. Oh, it's beautiful. But that led me, and I, of course, expressed this to you earlier, to ask you about your influences as well. So my questions to you about this particular piece are twofold. Number one, right? How does it express your indignation at the injustices of the world? And what would you say about your influences, both musically, poetically?
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, well, I guess I'll start with a little bit of the musical influence. I mean, definitely Leonard Cohen um, has been a big, you know, influence on me for a long time, and of course also, Bob Dylan, Robert Zimmerman, who just celebrated his
80th birthday.
he should live to 120 and be well, but um, I mean, the thing that I admired about both, obviously two Jewish guys, right? Um, one from Canada, one from the Midwest. So, I feel a little bit at, Midwest pride, but, and, just that they were really, through their careers, I think, playing with a lot of Torah, sort of in the way that I think I've done it a little bit, and I mean, I'm not saying I'm on their level, but it's I definitely studied their approach in terms of writing, and they're both protest singers in different kinds of ways, right? Um, I mean, I think that they're outraged in different ways in their career, and that probably could be a course on its own, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as I was thinking about this piece, I mean, just last year was so tough for so many people. I mean, it's still tough, and it's of course been tough, really, really, you know, ugly in Israel recently. But it's all over the world. I mean, look at what's happening in India now. I mean, people are dying by the thousands from this. Not only the coronavirus, but now they're getting this, black mold inside of them because they had the coronavirus. I mean, and you hear people over here that are unable to speak to each other because they don't agree politically. Sometimes people in the same family, and you can look at this world and think, what kind of you know crazy world is this that God has made for us? I mean, it makes absolutely no sense, And so, I was interested in this midrash, which comes out of Lech Lecha, where it basically talks about Abraham as walking and he sees this building that's burning down, and he says, nobody's in charge of this building. I mean, and God, waves from the rooftop and says, I'm the owner of the building, you know. So, oh, sorry. So my voice has gotten. I think I had my book on there. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So, Abraham says, "Who's in charge? This building is on fire." And God says, I'm the landlord here. So, I started thinking, well, that's like, obviously the Midrash is trying to tell us the world is on fire. It's not just a building. And, I can get really outraged at times that the world is on fire. And there were times, certainly last year, where it seemed like it was on fire. I mean, all the things that I've just described, and I'm sure that everybody on this call, can relate to it and have their own horror stories that they've endured over the last 15 months, So, I hear God calling. I mean, I don't, I hear God calling from the text, right? Where are you, right? And I mean, I feel like I should say this too, because this, I think, is an important piece. As I've said, I work in philanthropy. A lot of it is Jewish oriented, and it occurred to me over the last couple of months, I guess, being locked in. When I get out of this lockdown, and I'm able to engage directly with other Jewish philanthropists, and I say to them, look, you're spending all this money on Jewish education for these kids to be Jewish, or for adults to be Jewish, whomever to be Jewish. Why? What's the point? Why should they be? If I were to ask you, like, why be Jewish, what would be your answer? And I'm looking forward to having those kind of conversations with people. My answer is, we have a mission to make this world a place where God can exist, right? You can call it Tikkun Olam or whatever you can call it, Mikdash building. But, this is really, our mission. We're supposed to complete the creation of this world. It's up to human beings to do that. So, we look around at everything that is happening, the world being on fire and so forth. And God is telling us from the text, look at this, they're crushing the faces of the poor. What are you doing, right? Where are you, right? You cows of Bashan who defraud the poor, rob the needy, calling out to your husbands, bring that we may drink. Where are you? Where are you, human beings? Like, who's helping, right? And so then I get a little frustrated with God, right? And I say, my God, why have you abandoned me? Where are you? How long, Hashem, will you ignore me forever? How long will you hide your face? Where are you? My insides churn, my heart is turned over inside of me. Where are you? And I get a little upset with God. And then, of course you come to the book of Job and you hear God saying, gird your loins like a man. I will ask and you will look for me. Where were you when I founded the earth? We're from Exodus. Why do you cry out to me? Go forward. What do I require of you? Do justice, love goodness, and walk modestly with me. Cut away the thickness of your heart, and I will cut away the thickness of your heart. Let them build a mikdash for me so I can dwell among them. Where are you? Where are you, human beings? So that's, I think, what
Right. Yeah.
that's what that piece is about.
Okay, I'm noting that we have about 10 minutes left, and I'm sure there are folks who would like to be able to ask questions. So I'm gonna actually remove spotlights from both of us, and so that we can all see one another. If you look, put your screen on gallery view, and if you'd like to ask a question, I invite you, if you know how to find the hand raising icon, on your screen, do that. And if you don't, just raise your hand this way on your screen and we'll find you and give you the chance.
For sure.
Anybody? See, people are stunned. They need a few minutes.
Don't be shy.
Hey, I had a quick question, Ethan.
Never.
Okay, yeah, please go ahead. Is that Aaron?
That's Aaron, yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
So Ethan, are you going to narrate this book as well as a hard copy? I wasn't sure.
I don't know. It's a good
plan
question.
was.
It's a good question. I think, I don't know. I have to talk to our friend Dan John Miller to see if he'll do a book on tape for us. He's a good. He's got a good strong voice, as you know.
Awesome.
Thank you. It'd be good. It'd be a good one.
Without a doubt. Thanks, David.
Okay, good. So who else? Raise your hand one way or the other, or okay, Franz, please. And then I saw Sherry. Go ahead, Franz.
Can you hear me now?
Franz, by the way, yeah, well, I can hear you. I can hear you. And by the way, it's like I have to say, and I don't want to embarrass you, but to have, Franz is a well-known writer. I've enjoyed his books and his columns, and it's I do love seeing you. I miss seeing you in person, but it's really an honor for me that you're here today, especially.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I just want to say I really enjoyed the book, and why don't you sing it, by the way?
I could sing it. I could sing it, you know, maybe with Vincent and with Chazan Propus, we'll sing it.
Well, you know, I'm here today representing the Zollner Pistons.
Oh, exactly.
Uh, but I just want to say that some of the stuff reminds me, I did a story a few years ago in Oxford, not Oxford, Mississippi, Oxford, you know, a little north of London, on this guy, Brian Bilston, who is sort of the poet laureate of Twitter.
Yeah.
And Brian Bilston isn't his real name, by the way, but and he just wants to remain anonymous, and he's actually unemployed, but he has this huge following. And one of his poems reminded me, or actually the book reminded me a lot of one of his poems. It's called Refugees. And well, I'll tell you the story of the poem, because halfway through it, it completely turns around. So the poem is called Refugees, and it starts out, they have no need for our help. So do not tell me. These haggard faces could belong to you or me. Should life have dealt a different hand, we need to see them for who they really are. Chancers and scroungers, layabouts and loungers with bombs up their sleeves, cutthroats and thieves. They are not welcome here. We should make them go back to where they came from. They cannot share our food, share our homes, share our countries. Instead, let us build a wall to keep them out. It is not okay to say people are just like us. A place should only belong to those who were born there. Do not be so stupid to think that the world can be looked at another way. So that's the end of the poem. And then you read it from bottom to top.
Oh, yeah.
And from bottom to top, it says, the world can be looked at another way. Do not be so stupid to think that a place should only belong to those who were born there. These are people just like us. It is not okay to say, build a wall to keep them out. Instead, let us share our countries, share our homes, share our food. They cannot go back to where they came from. We should make them welcome here. They are not cutthroats and thieves with bombs up their sleeves, layabouts and loungers, chancers and scroungers. We need to see them for who they really are. Should life have dealt a different hand, these haggard faces could belong to you or me. So do not tell me they have no need for our help. Anyway, that's I was reminded of that reading the book.
Thank you.
Bravo. Sherry,
You always bring
Yeah.
something very, very,
Well,
thought-provoking.
I don't know, in this case, I'm not, I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but it's, you know, you keep talking about a book, but then I get the impression that it's not in a hard copy form. So
Oh.
what is the form of this and how is it available?
Yeah, it's a hard copy form, and then, what,
Okay,
and what I can do is, we can send around, a little link. If you have an address, I'll ship it to you. You know, this is a little strange, but, you know, when I used to do music, I just gave away my records for free, right? And I spent years on the road as a
Oh.
musician, and I gave away 50,000 records over the years. And
LPs?
well, like in those days it was CDs. Now it's vinyl again. And I take the same.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, exactly. So I do the same thing with the book. You know, I don't. Thank God, I don't. You know, need to support myself off the music or the book, and the Torah should be, you know, free. So it's, you know, to the extent there's wisdom in it, helpful. I'd love to send you a copy on me.
that's great. Thank you. I see Richard
Yeah.
Winter got
Thank you.
a hand raised.
Evening. Hearing the passages made me miss listening to your stories in the office. But you know, the sort of the imagery of the passages I was really drawn to.
Yeah.
And it made me sort of think about some of the imagery of some of your songs, which I've heard. And so then it sort of occurred to me, like, how was your process different from when you're writing songs to like writing for this book?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I really think that you know, the hard part about music is and I still do music, as you know, I like doing music. The hard part about it is I'll try to like fit, you know, the words rhythmically, you know, or in a certain kind of a line, you know, to go along with the music. So that, you know, the music can sort of force the breath of the line in a way, right? It becomes a little bit more, it's a little bit more confined or controlling in a certain kind of way. And with this, I could play with the rhythm. You know, it's a lot more free. I could play with the rhythm or the breath. I didn't have anything to constrain me. So it's like, if I got to a point where I felt like, oh, this line just feels like it needs to be longer, or this line needs to be shorter, or this line needs to have a totally different feel and a totally different rhythm. It's a different voice now. I didn't have any kind of music to, you know, sort of force my hand in that kind of way. So it was liberating to do this for sure.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay,
Thank
I'm looking at the time, Ethan, and I, you know, don't want to take advantage of you. I just have to correct something I said at the beginning before I forget. This is the final evening book talk of our year, but we do have one last book talk on June 9th with Leonard Greenspoon. That's a lunchtime event. So let me correct.
Oh, yeah, right.
And then back to this, you know, speaking for myself, it was a joy to hear you reflect on what you've written. What you've written is not just generous because you agree to share it, but it's extraordinarily generous, both for the personal quality of what you share, but also because of your learning that you share and your chavrutas, you know, the folks with whom you've studied who have influenced you, and you've taken from them a great deal, and now you pass it along. And that's not a little thing, to take some words of wisdom, some words of Torah, and pass them along. So thank you very, very much. And I hope that we can do this again when your next book appears.
Well, thank you. We will. Absolutely.
Okay, great. And everybody, thank you for joining us. And we hope you'll come back for future events, cultural, book-wise, and the like, sponsored by JTS and its library. Good night.
Good night.
Have a good one.
Good job.